And welcome to our webinar on business resumption. This morning, as per usual, we've got some amazing speakers and actually somebody all the way from Asia, Farouk, who's now enjoying evening sunshine in, where are you based, Farouk? He's on mute. Anyhow,
Malaysia, Jude, sorry.
So we also have, so Farouk's going to speak first. We've also then got Natasha Durkin from Shepherd and Wedderburn. We've got Phil Muir from Space Solutions, and we've got David Farbash from KPMG. And also then at the end, we have Paul Atkinson summing up today's webinar. So I'm going to hand over to Farouk Abdullah, the CEO from Natural Intelligence Solutions, who is no stranger to Scotland and moved over to Malaysia about 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And used to work on a board that's in the data lab with me, so that's how we know each other. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Jude. Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon to our Malaysian colleagues who've joined us. Just a quick introduction. I was born in Singapore, and I lived in Scotland for 20 odd years, and home is still Falkirk. I now live in Malaysia. I've been here for about three and a half years, and I run Natural Intelligence Solutions. We are a data science company based in Malaysia, and we operate out of Singapore and Philippines as well, so pretty much a Southeast Asian business. And we deal with data consultancy, AI, machine learning, data management, and also data science training. I'd like to take this 10 minutes to share our experiences in Malaysia. And how we've been dealing with this COVID-19 pandemic that's obviously affected all of us globally. Just to give you a context of Malaysian businesses, we're pretty much similar to the UK in that SMEs make about 98 to 99% of the Malaysian economy. Cumulatively, they contribute to about 40 to 45% of the GDP in Malaysia. And in the context of working in Malaysia, which is slightly different from that in the UK, the office environment in Malaysia is pretty much, in most cases, a 9 to 6, Monday to Friday, with very little flexible working hours, and that has been the norm in Malaysia. Since I guess setting up a business here under a bigger subsidiary of a bigger entity, I've had numerous conversations with HR pre-COVID-19 about flexible working hours and not having to see the GP for not coming up for work for one day, which you need here. So every single day that you're not at work, you need to have an excuse or a letter from the doctor. What has happened since the COVID-19 lockdown is that culturally, we have changed in the business environment. But let me describe to you what the lockdown is like in Malaysia. Malaysia went to a lockdown on the 18th of March, and for 6 weeks, it's called the Movement Control Order, or the MCO. And that was a strict lockdown. So no one under the age of 12 was allowed out of the house. Businesses were not allowed to operate, only obviously essential services such as groceries, hospitals, pharmacies. You only allowed one person in the car at any one time. And you're not allowed to travel more than 10 kilometers distance from your home. And obviously interstate travel is not allowed at all. So there was a huge impact on the SME business straight up from the moment the government announced a lockdown, and it was almost an overnight. They give you 1 day of grace period to get your matter sorted out, and then there's a full lockdown of the country. Subsequent to that, on May 4th, they announced a conditional movement control order, which means that the rules were slightly relaxed. So some more businesses were allowed to open. There was strict social distancing laws, so we're not allowed to be within a meter of each other. We're not allowed to gather more than 10%, but we were now allowed to exercise and leave our homes and go for walks and runs and so on and so forth. And kids were out of the house, albeit not to playgrounds and areas where there'll be large crowds congregating. But the challenge was obviously face masks had to be worn. It's not legal, but it's obviously an advisory. Temperatures had to be taken and personal information recorded when you're entering into buildings, when you're going to work or any other office environment. So you get your temperature taken and you got to record you got to give them your name and your phone number and the temperature recorded even if you go to the supermarket, for example, or any other stores that you go into. So during the last 3 months, we've actually seen a huge acceleration in digital adoption. And what has happened since the pandemic started is that we've realized that in the first lockdown, where there's a strict movement of full lockdown of people movement, we've seen small businesses, especially the mom and pops businesses or mom and pop businesses, switch to digital platforms very quickly. They've moved to WhatsApp. People are buying directly from farmers. The little shops are selling directly through WhatsApp, really, or any other communication messages. And they were delivering straight to the house. And that was a drastic change to previously, where SMEs were slow and really not taking up any digital platforms or using any digital platforms. And obviously, conference calls will move to the typical conference call platforms. And also, I guess for me as a business, what we've done is we've converted our training courses to digital online training courses. So we're delivering not online courses, but remote learning courses, which means our trainers came on a platform, and we would deliver the classes that way. So there was a huge cultural shift in businesses in the last 3 months. What we've observed is that on being able to return to work, there was a huge onus on employers to ensure the safety of their employees. So as a business lead, I'll have to provide face masks in the office environment. I have to provide sanitizers, obviously. I have to provide a thermometer to take the temperature of our staff on a regular basis. Some sort of a log, or it can be pen and paper, or it can be a QR code that I have to log when the staff clocked in, when the staff clocked out, and what were the temperature and how were their health conditions. That's something that we put in place. The building itself, where we work, we have flexible working hours, which means that we have 3 shifts, sort of someone starting at 8, someone starting at 9, someone starting at 10, to ensure that to avoid any congestion in public transport, obviously, and also in the common areas such as lift lobbies. Our lifts, we only allow 4 people in the lift at any one time. In some cases, might be 5. The lift is slightly bigger, but in our office block, it's 4 people in the lift at any one time. And then we have staggered lunch hours as well, which is made compulsory, so no one goes to lunch at the same time. So just to avoid the whole congestion in the common areas. So that's one from an office environment, I guess. What we've also seen is organizations in Malaysia giving free lunches to their staff in the office itself, so that they don't actually have to go out to get lunch during the lunch hour, which is quite a nice touch. I personally have not implemented it in my office, but I'm kind of thinking of it for the following weeks if the lockdown or the conditional lockdown continues. Business to business, actually, B2B. It's quite touching. We're more socially aware of other people's businesses. So when I invoice my clients and I say to them, look, can you make sure payment is on time, because I've got staff to pay, and people are more considerate to that, which is quite a nice thing to see in business. Usually it's a 30-day or a 60-day payment terms, and they will wait until the 30th day before they pay. So that's changing quite a lot. I've got clients who I've invoiced, and they're paying within 5 working days, within 7 days, which is really good. I guess the biggest change that I've seen is that there's less of a talk of strategy in a business. So there's more. We're more focused on the short term. We're more focused on what's going to happen in the 3 to 6 months. How are we going to evolve the business in the next 3 to 6 months? How do we keep our staff safe? So what I've implemented in the office as well to keep the staff safe is alternate working days. So alternate days you work from home, because I do understand that after working from home for 3 months, you do want to get some sanity and have some adult conversation, and would like to come to the office to talk to your colleagues. So we do an alternate working day, and every Friday we work from home. So that's been put in place so that we maintain some sort of sanity, and also taking care of our employees' welfare. So I guess the lessons that we learn in the context of what's happening here in Malaysia as the economy is beginning to open and the businesses are starting to operate as near normal as possible, is that we are actually prioritizing some employee safety everyone's safety, not employee, even our own safety. And using a lot more of the digital platforms. But more importantly, I think, if I can say this, we're becoming a bit more human in our business-to-business interactions, so less demanding, more understanding. I've run workshop sessions on digital platforms, and there's no complaints from the clients whatsoever. Obviously, I'm speaking from my personal experience, but I don't think I'm the only one who's seeing this change across the industries. As I talk to more business leaders within Malaysia, we're realizing that, being a bit more compassionate to each other and showing a bit more empathy to each other is actually the way forward in taking care of ourselves, and also ensuring that business sustainability of the business and the business remains relevant. That's my 10 minutes, Jude.
Brilliant. Thanks, Farouk. I love that term, socially considerate, and I think we should all take that forward. I have seen a lot of it in Scotland, but maybe it's just an undercurrent that we're not actually verbalizing what it is. So that's a really nice comment, and hopefully we can all live by that over the next few months and continue that post-COVID as well. So thank you very much, and it's really interesting to hear all your views from, hopefully we'll be going through the same in the next few months as we see progress. Next up, we've got Natasha Durkin from Shepherd and Wedderburn. Natasha, you're still on mute.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfect.
Oh, can you see my screen as well?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Sorry about that. I'm really having technology problems every day. So thanks again for the opportunity to speak about the architecture of how we're going to come out of the crisis. And I do think we're lucky in Scotland that we've had now two fairly significant documents providing a route map and a framework so that business and all of us as individuals and with families have both an opportunity to contribute to the discussion with Scottish Government and an understanding about the way governments is approaching moving out of lockdown. And there has been a phenomenal response to the very first document, the framework document that was published by Scottish Government, with hundreds of people contributing. I suppose people are at home, it's easier for people to contribute than it has been in the past. So I think that's a really positive development. So here's just the context within which government is working. We've had what could only be described as an unprecedented set of emergency legislation, really draconian, incredibly far-reaching powers, albeit subject to review, but nevertheless in place, that we've simply never seen within the UK to this extent. And criminal sanctions have been imposed for non-compliance. The picture has been really difficult for us as lawyers and for people trying to work through this crisis, because in addition to the Coronavirus Act and the regulations that apply, which are broadly the same across all the devolved administrations within the UK, we've also had extensive government guidance. The government guidance, particularly in Scotland, has gone further than the legislation and the regulations, and the government guidance in different administrations has diverged, and so that has led to a lot of uncertainty and a lot of difficulty in businesses working out how they can lawfully comply with the law and with the guidance. And coupled with that, we also have an existing body of law, particularly health and safety law, which can't be ignored in working out how the existence of COVID-19 should be addressed. So it's been really difficult and challenging time, particularly, and I've been advising businesses that have continued, and some manufacturing businesses that are not in the essential sector who have continued. So that's been, yeah, hard. I think we're going to have continued divergence within the UK, particularly as we move out of strict lockdown. Again, that poses problems for messaging, for people understanding what it is they should and shouldn't be doing. So apologies for the typo, which I will just change. Where I'm going to see phase 1 hopefully announced. So that's moving from where we are just now, which is phase 0. And then we've got our next review cycle, that'll be 18th June. We don't have any exact timetables or timescale for relaxation. What we're told is that the change is going to be gradual, it's going to be incremental, and all the material is absolutely stressed to people that you have to recognise that the phases will not necessarily be linear. There can be movement back if transmission rates increase, and not only that, but what's at the moment set within each phase may not actually happen within each phase. So it's very much an evolving and moving picture. As the route map says, this is the biggest challenge of our lifetime. Sometimes there's a bit of a I think because we're all stuck at home, just the gravity of what government is trying to grapple with, just unprecedented in scale. It's beyond enormous in a way. And that I think that message that we are living with this for a long time is one that they're very, very keen to emphasise, because the restrictions and changes in behaviour are with us for a long time to come. So the current position, and you know, it is important for, I suppose, all of us just to get our heads around the criteria for moving in and out of the phases. That helps, for example, communications with employees, with colleagues, so that everybody really understands that sitting behind the framework and the route map is the science, and the key piece of the science is the R number. That's how many people, the average number of people that would be infected with the virus by one individual. Now, in March, when lockdown started in Scotland, they think was around 4 to 6. At the moment, it's about 0.7 to 1. Now, I know within that, from reading the documentation, that there are parts of Scotland or areas of work, for example, care homes and hospitals, where the R rate is higher than that. And they also think that the R rate is higher in Scotland than it is in England. Now, one of the reasons for that might be that we're just later in the infection cycle, that basically COVID-19 moves south and then north in the UK. But again, the evidence apparently isn't clear. So the message is that progress is real, but it's fragile. So a key part of the strategy that I expect First Minister again will speak about today, later on today, is test, trace, isolate and support. So the relaxation is combined with testing, tracing, isolating and supporting. I'm not myself sure where we are in relation to the technology for tracing and where the Scottish Government is with the app. The last authoritative information that I read was that they were looking carefully at the app that's been tested and developed in England, but it's not clear that it will necessarily be adopted. What they have done though is started to ramp up the number of human beings who are going to be tracing in Scotland, and I've seen all the adverts have been out for that already. So the lockdown restrictions, they have to be reviewed at least once every 21 days. That means, I mean, in effect, the regulations have to be reviewed, and they have to be reviewed because they are so draconian, because they stop all of us from leaving our houses without a reasonable excuse. And as everybody knows, the first relaxation since the 23rd March was made on 11th May, and it was a really, really minor relaxation. The daily limit on exercise was reduced. One of the real issues that they are also grappling with are the impacts that lockdown has itself and on the most vulnerable and the health of the most vulnerable people in society. So there's 170,000 people who are shielding. Some of those are in the workforce as well. But their experience of this lockdown is one that is causing mental health problems, and itself can cause physical problems. So it's getting that balance right is really is an enormous challenge. So we've got 5 relaxation phases, and I've said every 3 weeks we'll get the review and report. As I've already said, you know, when people are looking at the materials that have been produced for the phases, it's really important to recognise that they're flexible. So if they say some things in one phase, it might not end up actually being relaxed in that phase. And also, hopefully, they say that some measures might end up being lifted sooner rather than they had thought. So as I've said, for today's, hopefully, movement to phase 1, the R number must be below 1 for at least 2 weeks, and the number of infectious cases must be declining. That does seem to be the position. And then for that, we look at the WHO criteria, World Health Organization criteria. I've got a slide just explaining what those are. To then move from phase 1 to phase 2, the R number has to be consistently below 1, and the number of infectious cases must be showing a sustained decline. So in relation to movement from then on, from phase 2 into phase 3, then into phase 4, there's really a long way to go. It's pretty evident when you start to drill down into how detailed, you know, the data needs to be really there before they can actually make these movements. It's absolutely plain that we're going to be living with, certainly with physical distancing, we're going to be living with hygiene measures, I don't know, forever it feels like, and limits to gatherings for many, many months as we move through the phases. So the criteria, the evidence shows COVID transmission is controlled, it's the R number. Systems to identify, isolate, test and treat, well, we're just starting that really in Scotland. Outbreak risks are minimised. That's very, very problematic still. Care homes and hospitals, but care homes in particular are really a vulnerable part of the picture. And that then spins out into the wider populations, people work in care homes. Preventative measures in the workplace, I'll come on to speak about those as well. Management of transference to and from communities of high risk. So when you have people moving around the economy, say from somewhere that's a high risk situation, a care home or whatever, into somewhere else, that needs to be well managed, and that communities have a voice and are informed. And I suppose this whole push or emphasis by Scottish Government on transparency, on wanting to hear people's views, is all around making sure that people do feel that they have a voice and are informed, because I think the evidence shows that when people aren't, then compliance becomes much more difficult to maintain. Because I think ideally the position in Scotland and from Police Scotland perspective is that they want to police with consent, and that it's really important for the enforcement agencies to feel that they can do that. So phase 1 expected to be announced today. What I expect the First Minister will emphasise again, that we don't have a fully contained virus. There is a risk of overwhelming the NHS, and so significant restrictions still have to remain in place. So what this means for business is that remote working is the default position for people who can. There'll be outdoor workplaces can commence again, but with physical distancing and once guidance is agreed. The plan for construction, it's been a really contentious area in Scotland because construction has effectively been sanctioned and allowed in England, is to implement phase 1 and phase 2 at the same time. Now there's agreement going on between the construction industry and Scottish Government on that, and then they will have an accelerated pathway, the construction industry, right through to completely open up. And preparations are already being made for reopening of the housing market as well. So for shopping, eating and drinking out. We'll get some drive-through outlets. We'll start to open up garden centres and plant nurseries, but not the cafes and dobies will be opening up. There will be unrestricted outdoor exercise, and sports that are non-contact sports will be allowed as well. And then everybody's so delighted that they could meet up with people from another household outside as well. So that, although it's very limited phase one, I think it will feel quite significant for everybody in Scotland. The phase two, they want all, before we can move to phase two, all 6 WHO criteria must be in place. Again, remote working will be the default position. Indoor non-office based workplaces can resume. Again, once guidance has been agreed. So all of these phases are going to be underpinned by this tick-tock between government guidance and existing set of regulations. Now, they say some of the existing law will be relaxed, but it's really strange how we're moving into these phases on the back of guidance that's going to be agreed with sectors and industry. Makes enforcement tricky and difficult from a legal perspective, because the guidance is just the guidance. It isn't regulation, it's not law, if you like. But it's a really interesting approach. But I think it's an approach that's going to create problems, because people who run in businesses and are responsible for the health and safety of their workers want certainty. And there's not going to be a huge amount of certainty within this framework. On the other hand, a prescriptive approach, I think, would be practically impossible given the differences in different businesses. So it probably is the best that can be done. My sense is that because the guidance is being agreed with health and safety executive, local authorities, trade unions, industry, that it should be fit for purpose. So again, in phase two, that construction should have moved further on, and people will be allowed to move house, and small retail units, so that would be small local shops and outdoor markets, and pub outdoor spaces can reopen in phase two. Phase three starts to feel more like normal, and track and test and trace should be up and running to the extent that if they need to stamp down in local areas, they can do that, so they can impose particular restrictions in local areas. And indeed, I think Matt Hancock last year, the day before, was talking about a sort of similar approach in England, but it makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's just feels a no-brainer to me. So at this point, workplaces are the ones that are open will have adapted, and physical distancing will be the norm, and they're signposting already, because there's so many changes in phase three. It might not happen all at once, so that probably won't all happen at once. It probably will be phased. You can meet up indoors in phase three with another household, but with physical distancing. So and you can drive outside your local area for leisure. So great too. And there will be full service public transport will be back at phase three. And this is when schools, this is where the opening of the schools has been slotted in at phase three. Now that's been planned for 11th August. I'm saying to everybody, do not think that phase three is going to happen on 11th August. There might be more relaxations announced alongside school opening, but their focus is they want the schools to go back for sure on 11th August. So it could just be the only thing, the only phase three thing that happens is that schools go back in a very old and sort of part-time way. So in phase three, again, if you can do remote working, then that should be the default position. So that everybody who's office-based, you'll be home-based for quite a long time. Indoor offices can, however, reopen again. There's going to be guidance agreed for that. And this is large retail will start to reopen in phase three as well. But again, with physical distancing, and pubs indoors can open as well. And hairdressers can open in phase three. And then there'll be some of the relaxations for the holiday sector also in phase 3, so the restrictions that we currently have on bread and breakfast and hotels, etc., will be relaxed, and there'll be live events will be possible, and all the current restrictions on funeral attendances and marriages and civil ceremonies will be lifted as well. So that just feels like that's going to be like a really important phase for everybody in the country. And phase 4 is their final phase. The virus is suppressed to very, very low levels. It's no longer a threat. But what they're saying in relation to that phase is that hygiene is going to continue to be emphasised. So I think that's undoubtedly the case. And that remote and flexible working will be encouraged. It really picks up a point that Farouk was making, that I suspect, I'm pretty sure that for many, many, many businesses, the model that was adopted pre-emergency will not go back to business as usual, that flexible working has worked for lots and lots of businesses, as has remote working. So I imagine there'll be ongoing evolution and change in how we all work, and we can get mass gatherings at phase 4 as well. And I'll just really, really quickly say some of this guidance. So I've spoken about that all of these phases, there's going to be government guidance that forms part of it. Some of that started to be published already. So a couple of days ago, we got retail guidance and manufacturing guidance that has come out. There might well be further guidance in relation to those sectors and other sectors. The law still remains in place. Even though the guidance has come out in advance, the law still remains the same. Retail's not coming back just because the guidance has come out. But what this shows is, and the kind of approach that's going to be adopted, which is risk assessments. Your classic health and safety risk assessments are absolutely crucial to reopening. But there's particular things, obviously, because of COVID-19, you have to consider vulnerable, shielding employees. Pilot trials seems a really sensible approach, changing shift patterns, use of PPE for people traveling to work and in work. Physical distancing is going to be with us all the way through. So that means signage, limiting customers, restricting access to lift, as Farouk was pointing out, reducing entry-exit points, staggering shifts, and finding out, where are your high-risk areas. Customer hygiene, so in lots of the supermarkets now, there's the hand sanitizer before you go in, and cleaning protocols. I think where we're probably really lagging behind Asia is we don't have any kind of consistent approach to temperature checking at all within the UK. I mean, it's only been introduced to Heathrow, I think, within the last week or so. So, although there are some companies, I believe Amazon, for example, does temperature checks. And for enforcement purposes, existing health and safety law is going to be used. And the approach that's been taken is that Police Scotland will refer complaints about lack of physical distancing at work to the local authorities, and then they'll pass complaints to the health and safety executive. So that kind of patchwork approach. I mean, I have to say myself, slightly disappointed that we haven't heard more from the health and safety executive, and there's limited guidance available on their website. The industry guidance that has been produced across a whole wide of different sectors has been excellent and is easily available. And in fact, Scottish Government in these guidance documents is linking to a whole lot of that, so it should be available really widely. And again, that the Scottish Government are asking for contributions and views. So if you have an industry body, a sector body, it's really important to start to engage with them to get clear messages through to government. And my sense is that they're listening. They want to hear the experiences of, for example, essential businesses that have been working and how they found trying to do physical distancing in their businesses. So I think that's me, and I shall hand over to Philip.
Thanks, Natasha. I'm very concerned that the hairdressers are not going to be open before the kids go back to school. So
I did try to give you a heads up yesterday on that, Jude.
Oh, well, So over to Philip.
Okay, so I shared my slides. Can we see the slides there?
Yeah.
Right, okay. Okay, so good morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to present here. So I lead the workplace consultancy and design division within Space Solutions, and like many others, we are looking at tentative steps to come back to the office. Now, we had been looking at an earliest possible date of that being the middle of July, corresponding with relaxation phase 3. But following Natasha's presentation, I'm not so sure about that, but we'll see. Obviously, a lot of things have to fall into place for that to happen. So just some of our own experiences at Space, we formed our own return to office group. The aims of that being to prepare the place for the people and prepare the people for the place. Within that group, we have 5 key strands of internal input. So we have the QHSE element. We have our own space planning and building capacity reviews. We have the HR element, IT and facilities management as well, and inputting to that group. So today we're going to have a look at just the space planning and building capacity element, and especially in relation to physical distancing within office buildings, although this principle can be applied to most building types, and we're currently advising a variety of clients on this. So what I'll do is I'm going to run through an example of a typical office and how we review that. So you will have seen some of the guidance available. There's the UK government working safely during COVID-19 in offices and contact centres. And we have the Scottish government route map that Natasha talked through. So the guidance states the need for 2 metre physical distancing. And down the bottom here, we are looking at plans of buildings, and we are using this graphic to represent a person at the centre of a 2 metre radius, what we're calling a hot zone. And so that person's hot zone shouldn't clash with another person at the centre of an adjacent hot zone. Simply the red circle shouldn't cross the green dot when we look at plans. Okay. So just looking at a typical office space. So a variety of different spaces. I'm sure you'll all have been in offices like this. Lots of open plan space, cellular space, informal and formal meeting areas, and there are 108 desks in this example. So just looking purely at the open plan areas first, if we apply our hot zones that we mentioned and we remove the desks where we cannot achieve the 2 metre physical distancing with the hot zones, immediately only 50% of your desks are now usable, so from 108 to 54. But that's step one. We have to take into account the effect of primary and secondary circulation in these areas, because you've got busy thoroughfares, people moving through the office. So looking at that, primary circulation shown in blue being the main thoroughfares through the space, joining up the main access and egress, fire escapes, etc., etc. Another little bit of information is that the advice is, if you can, to implement a one-way system on your primary circulation to avoid people, crossing by each other, coming into close proximity. And in this example, that's quite easy. It's like a racetrack circulation, but if you only have a single two-way circulation, you may have to introduce something like passing places to avoid that. But then we also have, shown in green, we have the secondary circulation, which is the local access to desks, the people moving in and out of desks. So we're trying to look at, free access to desks. We're not wanting people to have to ask each other to move. So what does that mean when we take into account how people really move through an office? And you can see here if we show our hot zone again on a primary circulation route, you can see that just moving along there, coming in close proximity to desks and soft seating areas, you know, immediately that makes these areas unusable, and the same being for secondary circulation, moving between desks at backs. You've got people coming well within the required 2 meter physical distance. So if we apply the effects of that circulation to the usable space, we get this. So we have a reduced number of usable desks, down at 25%, believe it or not. And Red Cross is showing the desks that are not used. Now there are some, you know, there are some options around this, around which desk would be the usable desk and what have you. But applying the 2 meter physical distancing strictly, this is what you get, and this is what a lot of our clients are now trying to respond to. This kind of level of reduced capacity. So we're down to, I think, 21 usable desks out of 108 in this example. Next, so that's just stripping out the unusable desks and showing you what the usable desks are. Sure, you'll agree it's quite onerous there. Then moving on to things like meeting rooms. Now, I suppose trying to be pragmatic about meeting rooms and maximising the usable spaces within meeting rooms. You can see up in this boardroom in the top left, we've got 5 usable desks, usable chairs, sorry. But to really, to maximise the use of these spaces, you would have to have a sequence of entry and egress. You know, it would be like last person in, first person out type thing, so that people aren't coming in close proximity to others. So we've got, you know, and how you want to use your meeting rooms. Are you going to have meetings, or are you going to use these as potential areas for working as well? You need to take that into consideration. Also, the ancillary spaces, the nice collaboration spaces that we've built up over the years, soft seating, etc., often located along primary circulation routes. Again, these are close to busy circulation routes and therefore are becoming not usable. Shared spaces, we have to look at protocols for managing shared spaces like kitchen, printer areas. In this example, there's an archive room. You know, there really needs to be one person in these rooms at a time, depending on the size of them. And there's also the WCs here, potentially one person in the WCs at a time. How you manage that, how that is visible. And there's probably some, depending on the design of your office and whether it's a multi-tenant space, and maybe some interface with your building management on how that is done. Lifts, Farouk mentioned earlier, in this example, we're looking at one person at a time in lifts. You know, quite simply, it's going to be difficult to do anything other than that in the UK. And people are going to be encouraged to use the stairs to stop queues forming. And that's going to be tricky in some of your taller buildings, as you can imagine. Stairs as well. Can we have an access stair and an egress stair? You know, as part of the one-way system, just so that people aren't crossing each other. And also, but just to bear in mind that in the event of a fire, all of these stairs are very likely going to be fire exits. So that would have to be relaxed in the case of an exit in a fire. So some, you know, just general considerations around this. You know, in summary, we're looking at establishing the usable and non-usable desks and the protocol for shared spaces. A whole bunch of signage requirements. There's a lot of good stuff out there about types of signage, you know, for showing that desks are in use or out of use, how many people in lifts, how many people in meeting rooms, how to manage WCs. Equipment requirements, hand sanitizers, temperature checks, whether people are going to do temperature checks, enhanced cleaning materials, and also liaison with your own cleaners. Do you need to alter their regime? Circulation, one-way systems and passing places like we've mentioned. And most importantly, once you've figured all this out, it's communication and training to staff, telling them how to use the building, making sure this is absolutely clear. So that's it. Thank you. And if we can be of help, just please get in contact.
Phil stopped to 10 minutes. He was the one I worried about.
Thanks, Jude.
Now we have David Forbat.
Right, so thank you very much, Jude. What I wanted to talk a bit about was a slightly different set of issues, which is cybersecurity and IT. So I'm going to make this reasonably quick given the timings. So first observation, very obvious one, COVID-19 has forced us to transform the way we work quite fundamentally. And some of the projects around secure collaboration and video conferencing might have taken a year to implement, we've driven through in weeks. So very, very aggressive. Pragmatism has become the rule just now. And if we're frank, we've taken some fraud and security risks along the way that we wouldn't have accepted in some other circumstances. So what have we seen with organised crime? The organised crime groups have been quite ruthless and quite entrepreneurial in exploiting fear, uncertainty and doubt around COVID-19. So they repurpose their phishing and attack infrastructure to be themed around COVID-19, whether it's coronavirus testing kits or PPE that's in scarce supply, or just playing to government subsidy and furlough schemes and authoritative sources of information. So we've seen all of that. Originally, we had some assurances from organised crime, which were pretty worthless, that healthcare and our response to coronavirus wouldn't be targeted. We've seen quite the reverse now over the last month, with very aggressive targeting of hospitals, but more importantly, the organizations engaged in coronavirus research and therapeutic development as well. We've got some indications that ransomware is more likely in home working environments as well, about 3.5 times more likely, because the security controls are just that little bit weaker than we might normally have in a corporate IT environment as well. Less effective antivirus, patching, vulnerability management, those sort of issues. So as we move beyond lockdown into some of that relaxation, I think we are going to see organised crime carrying on. Nothing's going to change in terms of them using COVID-19 as a theme. The threat's not going to diminish, but we are getting better as a community at disrupting some of those activities. So the NCSC's suspicious email reporting service has been amazing just now. They're receiving over 80,000 scam email reports every week just now, and helping disrupt organised crime groups as a result. So a key thing for me is keep your employees up to date with the changing threats, the fact they're still going to be targeted. And the Scottish Government produces a really good COVID-19 cyber bulletin, which is a great source of information on a weekly basis. So shameless plug for that. There's been a dash to cloud services and collaboration tools. And Teams and Zoom have just become, for many of us, all of our lives sometimes actually, back to back from 8 to 8. But the key things there are the security really needs to be addressed properly. So password protection of Zoom sessions as an example, updating to the latest version of Zoom, version 5, which is a different encryption model, more secure, and using two-factor authentication on cloud services like Office 365 as well. All of those things are important, and they carry on even after we've gone back to work and relaxed under lockdown. So our working model probably has changed forever for some businesses. And there are advantages because it gives us flexibility about home working now, as we try and meet the needs of childcare, vulnerable adult support as well. But it can also be immensely distancing for some people and quite isolating as well. So there's a key part of security, which is just about people, actually, just maintaining that engagement with employees working remotely. That matters as much as anything in managing what some people might describe as the insider threat. So that's, for me, is a reality for the future. And some firms will, of course, look to property footprint reduction longer term, saying, what percentage of my workforce can I encourage to work remotely in that period just now? But for me, we've created a security debt a little bit, unfortunately. We've had to put some very pragmatic workarounds in place, and we've done that pretty quickly just now. So as we go back to work and start relaxing lockdown, there's some home cleaning up to do here. Have home working systems been properly patched and maintained? Not always, actually. Do we need to update and run antivirus scans on those systems as they return and connect to our corporate networks? Potentially, yes. Do we need to provide additional corporate devices where people have been forced to use their own devices instead, their own personal laptop or mobile phone? And the answer is, if we're embedding home working long term, the answer is probably yes to that as well. Do we need to reconfigure office IT environment? A lot of firms I deal with have stripped their main office premises out to support home working. In some cases, bare, actually. So there's a big piece of getting the corporate IT environment back up and running, secured, and ready to support the return to work as the lockdown restrictions lift as well. That just needs to be done properly for me. And then there's some real basic stuff. A lot of people have printed stuff at home. They've got a lot of confidential waste, which is quite sensitive. And is there a way of them disposing of it securely? So there's that to deal with. And then I think there's a couple of other pieces for me. It's worth thinking about who should return to work to reduce your fraud and security risks. And call center workers working remotely are a classic example of that as well. We can't provide the same security and controls and monitoring as we would do in physical premises. So for fraud purposes, it may be sensible to do that as well. And it's also then worth thinking about downstream as financial pressures start to bite. How are we going to deal with the joiners, people returning from furlough back into work, and potentially leavers from the organization as, frankly, we begin to come under financial pressure and reduce some of our workforces post-furlough. So those processes need to be quite right, well developed and in place as well. So that's the hard times ahead. And we are all going to come under cost pressures, and we will be tempted sometimes to cut cybersecurity budgets. Some things we can do. We can look at greater automation. We can rationalize some of the security controls we got in place. But we are going to have to deal with this threat longer term, and that will be a challenge for us, I think, in the long term. We also have to keep an eye on the supply chain. So a lot of our suppliers have made the same trades around cybersecurity as we have, frankly. And they're operating, in some cases, with some risks and some privacy issues. In some cases, they're going to come under the same financial pressures we're seeing elsewhere in the economy. And we will see supply chain collapses as well. So being in a position where you really understand who you depend on as suppliers and what the contingencies are, and sometimes engaging with those key suppliers, particularly your managed IT providers, just to understand where they are and the approach they're taking to protecting your sensitive information and data. So a couple last pieces from me. We've learned some real lessons around resilience here. We've had to deal with premises being shut down, key people being absent, supply chain disruptions, sometimes tech failures, and even in the worst case, cyber attacks. We've learned a lot of lessons around that. Let's not forget that going forward. But let's also put a little bit of time and effort into thinking about how we deal with some bad scenarios, if they do occur over the next 6 months or so, including technology failures in that technology core that we're now more dependent on than ever, but also cyber attack, particularly if we had a ransomware incident. And that for me is all about getting the protection right, the basics, but also knowing who you would go to if it did happen in terms of specialist support, and also being clear on what the core of your business is you want to prioritize in terms of recovery and restoration of service as well. So there are some lessons along the way. But I'm also very positive. We built one excellent community around this as well. And it's really shown us how cybersecurity as a community can come together in Scotland and more broadly as well. And for me, Jude, I mean, the SBRC's played a great role at the heart of doing that for Scotland. And I just wanted to take a minute to thank your team for everything they've done for the Scottish business community in this space as well. And I'm just going to leave you with some practical considerations for return to work. Things you really ought to think about. Check and patch home working devices. Think about migrating off personal devices if you can. Confidential waste disposal. And a quick review of your cloud security, because you've set up a lot of ad hoc infrastructure. So now's the time just to think about how you secure that long term. And for things like Zoom, if you've got personal licenses, migrate to an enterprise license. You can control the security of the privacy better, and monitor how those licenses are being used as well. Prioritize which employees should be returning to work first for fraud and security purposes. Think about joiners, movers and leavers. And if you've moved e-commerce channels, as a lot of people have done, very sometimes, now is the time just to look at security on some of those websites and make sure you're happy with that for the long term. And then the final message for me is keep up security awareness and keep your staff and employees engaged. They're probably the key part of this whole security and fraud control piece going forward. And that's me, Jude.
Thanks, David. Both myself and David need to log off now to go on to a different call. And I'd just like to say, yeah, my team is fantastic about doing all this, but we wouldn't be able to do these kind of sessions without all of your involvement, and also the prep to put everything into around the theme and making sure that the content is relevant. And also to people like Farouk who stay on in the evening time in Malaysia to attend. So we need to head off. Paul's going to sum up today's session, and thank you very much, and we'll get all the details sent out to you on email later on. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jude. Thanks, David. I'd like to kick off really by thanking all of the contributors in the panel today. It's been fascinating looking at different angles of business resumption and the impact. We continue to say we're living in unprecedented times, and I think it's pretty clear that things are going to go on for a lot longer than we all hoped a few weeks ago, and that's going to create quite a lot of business pressures. I won't say too much about the economic impacts other than we've still to see a lot of that, and as we emerge out of the furlough support, I think businesses across Scotland are going to find that pretty challenging in different regimes, different sectors. It was great to hear how things are panning out in Malaysia from Farouk, prioritising safety, massive increase in digital usage, but also the kind of socially considerate thing. I think one of the sustainable changes that we may see coming from the COVID crisis is an increasing interest in societal impact and looking after each other, which I think is a great thing to see and hopefully will sustain. Natasha went on to talk about the different phases of the relaxation process that we're going to go through in Scotland. Again, it's pretty clear that it's going to be a while before we can get back into our offices and start working together again, and probably a much longer term impact on hospitality, venues and so on. Again, that's going to be pretty troubling in terms of financial impact, and I'm kind of hopeful we can get some resumption of normal business, as close to normal business as possible. We then looked at the kind of space considerations with Philip, and when you see that even in an open plan office, you're only able to use about 25% of the space, there or thereabouts, again, that's going to be pretty challenging. When I think about the office spaces that my recruitment business is in, we employ about 120 people in the Central Belt in Edinburgh. We've got about 10,000 square feet of offices. That's going to be a big problem for us. And also, given that now, I think hybrid working models and flexible working, more remote working is here to stay. What does that actually mean in that context as well? And I'll come on to another point on that in a second. And finally, David has gone to quite a lot of practical considerations in terms of cybersecurity, technical support for systems, and just the changes that's going to require in terms of hybrid and home working as well. And I think all of that content was highly relevant. One thing that's not been mentioned, I think, is that if we accept there's going to be more remote working and more home working, a lot of working environments where people live are not actually suitable at the moment. So I think some consideration needs to be given to the home working environment and whether it's set up suitably for your home workers. If you live in a big apartment like I do, it's probably not a problem. But if you live in a 2-bedroom flat, it's much more of an issue to make sure it's safe, secure, and so on. So I think that's something that Space Solutions might want to offer as a service to clients, I think, going forward. I think some of the changes we've seen are here to stay. There was a survey done recently which covered 1,000 people in 10 different countries. And the 10% of the response was that 10% more people would be working remotely or from home. But bear in mind that 1,000 sample included people who can't work from home. construction workers, hospitality and so on. So I suspect for normal office workers, that's more like 20 to 25% is a sustainable home working number, depending on the business you're in. The second thing is massive reduction in business travel. And I think video conferencing and these kind of technical tools are going to be used widely. I think for most people, the home working adoption has actually happened pretty smoothly. And now everyone is used to using these tools to work, and I think we'll continue to use these tools. I think you're going to see, as Farouk said earlier, massive acceleration in digital adoption as a result of this. On the first webinar we did back at the start of this process, there was a gentleman, a CIO for a company called EC English that does English language training in 25 countries. All of their work was classroom based, and they had to move their whole business model online in 3 days. Otherwise, they were out of business, basically. And they managed to do that. And his comment was that before COVID, that move would have taken 3 years, not 3 days. And so I think there's a point about that, which is let's all not waste a good crisis in terms of improving working patterns, changing business models, and look to the future. We will emerge from this, and my guess is we'll emerge from it in a slightly different fashion. Listen, many thanks for coming along today. I hope you found that extremely useful. Thanks again to all the speakers. And at that point, we'll call it a day, and you'll be able to pick up the ongoing webinars on LinkedIn and on the SBRC website, and I'm sure the videos will be uploaded for people to review at their leisure. Thank you.